Body Segment 1. What actually happened? National Director of Public Prosecutions Andy Mothibi confirmed that arrest warrants issued by the Investigating Directorate Against Corruption, IDAC, for 2 of the country's most senior police officers have been placed on hold. The officers in question, Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo, head of SAPS Crime Intelligence, and Major General Nosipho Madondo. Mothibi says he's now subjecting both cases to an independent review to be handled by a team of prosecutors with no connection to IDAC itself. His reasoning? Public concern and direct representations made by Khumalo's own legal team. Let that sink in for a second. The head of the NPA is not just reviewing evidence, he's reviewing whether his own anti-corruption unit acted appropriately in trying to arrest 2 of the country's top cops. Body Segment 2. Why the warrants were never even executed. Here's where it gets murkier. IDAC says the warrants were never carried out in the first place because Khumalo and Madondo were both part of the security planning team responsible for the nationwide protests that erupted on the 30th of June. In other words, the very officers facing arrest were, at that moment, considered essential to keeping the country safe. That's an extraordinary contradiction. 2 compromised to avoid arrest, but 2 operationally critical to actually arrest. Body Segment 3. A turf war at the top. Mothibi didn't stop at the review. He revealed he's now personally engaging the acting police minister to try to defuse what he's calling a standoff between IDAC and SAPS. A standoff, he says, risks damaging public confidence in law enforcement altogether. This comes on the back of a public spat involving National Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi and IDAC head advocate Andrea Johnson, both making public comments about the investigations into Khumalo and his colleagues. And it gets more chaotic. Mothibi says he had zero knowledge that IDAC was even attempting to arrest these officers. He only found out while flying back into the country. The man ultimately accountable for prosecutorial decisions in South Africa was blindsided by his own directorate. Body Segment 4. This isn't Khumalo's only legal headache. It's worth noting Khumalo isn't a stranger to IDAC's crosshairs. He's already facing separate corruption charges alongside 6 other senior officers over the alleged irregular appointment of an unqualified civilian. So this new review doesn't erase his legal troubles. It just adds another layer of institutional confusion on top of them.
A very good evening to you, Ntate Mashayile. Thank you so much for your time. What do you make of these developments to put these arrest warrants on review? Was there ever a case to begin with?
Masa, good evening to you and the fantastic team in the production room. Given what we had at Madlanga on Friday about how the NPA and some of the members of IDAC and some of the generals who were colluding to ensure that cases disappear, particularly KCM Mepeta, after the stabbings and the J88 Kapenset. This says to us, if those cases could disappear, there is a possibility that the charges against General Khumalo and General Madondo were just fictitious charges that were put up to hamper and to scuttle the developments within the crime intelligence ambit that would be aimed at ensuring that they don't unearth what has been happening as per the Madlanga Commission development. So, Martha, I am not disappointed by the warrants being put on hold. Actually, it lends credence to some of the things that we heard that are happening at NPA/IDAC. And this is before Ntate Mothibi and Ntate Kaiser Khanyago showed up at the NPA. There has been talk all over the show that there is a so-called Indian cabal that would ensure that there are serious defeating of the ends of justice against the victims of crime. So reading it from that context, Masa, and listening to the audio that was played and later learning that the case docket was handed over to a perpetrator or a suspect of women abuse in that particular instance, and that particular person tailoring his statement to fit in with the statement of the victim, so that the statement of the victim cannot be used in court. I'm not surprised that these things are happening, that these warrants have been put on hold. But thanks to the new NDPP and the spokesperson and the new team that has arrived at NPA, we expect the better now that we have people who have a different mindset.
And also now, when you're mentioning that the initial charges, that there were those thoughts, and also General Mkhwanazi had also alluded to this, that these are just fictitious charges against the pair as well. When we're looking at that, what does that decision to place these arrest warrants on hold also signal about the current state of the relationship between the IDAC and the SAPS?
What it tells you and I, Masangwanamme, it tells us that there are factions, for the want of a better way, there are factions in IDAC that would want to mutilate some of the operatives in crime intelligence, particularly the head of Mr. Dumisani Khumalo, General Dumisani Khumalo. Some of those factions within IDAC have been gunning for the jugular for this gentleman. Now, this staying or putting on hold this warrant, when I do a pattern analysis from the very first arrest of this individual, of this general, fills in the gap of suspicions that I've always had about a witch hunt against this individual, and also now that we had another suspect, General Madondo, coming through, it tells you some of these members of these rogue members within IDAC, for the want of a better way, would ensure that the operations of crime intelligence are scuttled, and some of these people who are alleged to have committed various crimes that we have yet to listen to are actually aimed at making sure that crime intelligence is hobbled or hobbling the army of crime intelligence, and therefore costing the whole army of crime prevention, crime combating and crime detection, which is based on the intelligence gathered by crime intelligence.
You know, you're saying that there's also yet more evidence that we are yet to listen to, and we do know as well that the Malanga Commission has also been extended to later this year, to November 2. So when we're listening to, for instance, what we heard on Friday, the audio by General Khan speaking to his junior as well, and also, of course, that assault case and the alleged interference by the IDAC herself, considering that we're only in July now and then we've still got a couple of months till November, do you think there'll be even more explosive evidence showing this rift between IDAC as well as SAPS?
Masa, the evidence that we listened to on Friday at Malanga Commission was really nauseating. It amounted to vomit that we do not expect in the process. I am talking about what we listened to was nauseating. The intimidation and the disrespect to women who might be juniors to generals, and them those generals or that general abusing power by intimidating, even shouting at that female brigadier. The fact that you are a general does not give you the right to shout, to scream and yell and show contempt to a female, particularly an African female in that context, who deserve better from a treatment point of view, given what we have been advocating for against gender-based violence, in this case, influenced by the power of office. I am definitely certain that more explosive evidence will come from that very story, Wenamasa. Remember, we haven't heard what the contents of that statement, Mepeta, and the responding statement from that gentleman, Firoz Khan, who would have responded to what that female brigadier was saying. There'll be more explosive evidence. And like I said, Masa, in our discussion some time back, there is bound to be another extension beyond November because of the seriousness of evidence that would need to be investigated, or allegations that would need to be investigated by the commission.
You know, Dr. Mashaile, it also feels like history kind of repeating itself here. I mean, given the history, for instance, of the Scorpions versus the police style kind of conflict, is this existing oversight mechanism, is that enough? We also saw the Justice Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi also establishing the ombudsman of IDAC. Will that be robust enough to prevent this from happening again?
I can certainly say yes, Martha. Having had a meeting a few weeks ago with the DPCI judge on behalf of a client, by extension a cousin of mine, who was taken to the cleaners, almost taken to the cleaners by some member of the Hawks from Mpumalanga. The findings of the DPCI judge restored confidence in the oversight mechanisms of institutions like IDAC, like DPCI judge. And Tateli Khodi Mokoni showed that he has no room for errors, and particularly where there has been violations of the rule of law. And I am hopeful that whomever is going to be a judge or the ombudsman of IDAC will do what is expected to be done, as we have seen with the DPCI judge.
And just before I let you go, Dr. Mashaile, just, you know, when we're looking at the sequence of events as well, and some of just the alarming things, a lot of the confusion as well, we saw Khumalo and Madondo also write to IDAC just seeking clarification as to why these warrants of arrests had been issued in the first place. We saw General Mkhwanazi also rush into the Brooklyn police station to try and get some answers as to what's happening. The NPA then shortly afterwards, a couple of hours later, then said, no, look, we won't actually arrest them because they are part of, you know, the security cluster and operations for June 30, but they said they'll get to it after June 30. Now we find ourselves having to pause it as well. I mean, how would you describe the manner in which this whole thing has transpired?
Masa, as a strategist, if I want to cripple your show, I will ensure that I create a wrong narrative, Masa, and the same logic superimposed on hobbling the operations of the show in codes of crime intelligence. When you hobbling it means dragging it, making it go slow instead of running fast in gathering crime intelligence information that would be turned into intelligence product. When we see the behavior of IDAC in line with what I'm talking about, hobbling of the army, you would certainly agree with me, Masa, that the stop-start approach has never yielded any dignity for the processes of law and order, particularly those individuals who are psychologically traumatized. Having a right to IDAC says that individual is actually psychologically traumatized. He and she would want to know so that they should not be arrested in the course of their duty somewhere else where they are gathering intelligence. And I, for one, would agree with an individual who says, let me know what I have done so that I shouldn't be, when I'm at parade addressing members, I don't have to see IDAC members rocking up to arrest me, removing my ranks and that kind of stuff.
Body segment 5. The Scorpion's Ghost in the Room. Justice Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi didn't mince words about what's at stake. She explicitly invoked the Scorpions, the elite anti-corruption unit disbanded in 2009 after years of political battles with police leadership, as the nightmare scenario South Africa cannot afford to repeat. Her comment signals that this isn't being treated as a minor bureaucratic disagreement inside government. It's being framed at the highest levels as an early warning sign of the same kind of institutional sabotage that gutted South Africa's fight against corruption before. That's also why a new IDAC ombudsman office, led by retired Judge Takalani Raulinga, was launched the same day this announcement was made. An oversight body meant to referee exactly these kinds of disputes before they spiral further. What's next? Mothibi says the outcome of his engagements with the acting police minister will be reported directly to the Justice Minister. Whether that produces real accountability or simply buries the case in another layer of review remains to be seen. Watch for whether the independent prosecutorial review actually reinstates these warrants or quietly lets them fade.